A client of mine was preparing to sell his business for $250 million. But today, that business has still not been sold, and the value may be $20 million at best. Can you imagine? The emotional toll on my client, while he's still very wealthy, the toll has been enormous, a roller coaster. And it really all comes down to one question I ask every business owner before they consider selling their business. Prior to founding Essential Partners, I spent 17 years on Wall Street helping to manage money for some of the largest institutions in the world. And during that time, my job was to understand business and valuation by meeting with Fortune 500 CEOs and CFOs, some of the names you might know, Jeff Bezos, Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, and many others. And by understanding business and valuation, I now bring that to business owners who are approaching an exit while managing the money on their behalf after they sell their business. So here's the question. Do you see a big threat to your business over the next 5 to 10 years? And so what is a threat? A threat can be any change that's going to impact the current cash flows of the business or the trajectory of those cash flows. Let me give you an example. Imagine you own a local newspaper in a mid-sized American town. Why not Buffalo? Warren Buffett at one point owned the Buffalo Evening News. And so in thinking about that business, imagine something like Google or the internet came along, and all of a sudden, your local advertising monopoly has been decimated. Not only did your cash flows go down, but the multiple that someone was willing to pay on those cash flows or EBITDA is likely to also go down substantially, magnifying the impact. Let me give you another example. Imagine your customer acquisition is conducted primarily on Google through various search strategies. And then we have a platform change driven by artificial intelligence. This allows your customers, or rather your competitors, to come in and take market share if they're more adept at managing that platform change. All of a sudden, your leads dry up. Your cash flows become compressed because your customer acquisition costs have increased. All of a sudden, your business is not growing the way it once was, and your profitability has suffered. So these are two examples of why competitive threats or technological threats in general can impair the value of your business. So you might be asking yourself, why 5 to 10 years? I think 5 to 10 years forces business owners to zoom out, because what do you think the buyers are doing? If you have a private equity analyst or private equity portfolio manager looking to acquire your business, they're not looking at the next year or the next 2 years. They're trying to match the business investment that they're making in you with the duration of the fund that they're investing in, which is typically 10 years. In addition, by focusing on a 10-year or a 5-year time horizon, it allows you to sell your business now before this threat is more easily recognized by the buyers of your business. If there's a threat that's clearly apparent this year, next year, or in the next few years, that's already in the valuation that someone's willing to pay for your business. But a longer term threat that you, as the business owner, recognize, but others externally do not recognize, they're not necessarily factoring that threat in to their valuation analysis. Now, let's go through a few quantitative examples of how this philosophy plays out in real businesses. Let's start with business A. Business A is a lawn, fertilizer, and weed control business, something that's highly unlikely to be disrupted over the next 5 to 10 years. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but highly unlikely. Business A, this lawn business, does $10 million in revenue and 20% cash flow or EBITDA margins for shorthand. So with $10 million in revenue and 20% EBITDA margins, it's generating $2 million in EBITDA. Given the fact this business has been growing at around 10% per year, private equity buyers are willing to pay, in this case, around 12 times. So for this example, which is oversimplified, this business is worth $24 million today. Now let's play this out over the next 5 to 10 years. Let's imagine that this lawn business continues to grow at 10% revenue over the next 7 years. During that time, their revenue will essentially double to 20 million in revenue. At the same time, let's further assume that their costs are not growing at 10%. So their costs are growing less than revenue. Because of that, their EBITDA margins are no longer 20%, they're 25%. So now you have a lawn business that's 20 million in revenue with 25% EBITDA margins. And then let's further assume that it's still being valued at 12 times EBITDA, given the characteristics of that business have not been threatened. And so the multiple folks are willing to pay for it is the same. So 12 times EBITDA of 5 million results in a $60 million valuation for this business, up from 24 million 7 years ago. So a very favorable result considering there were no threats on the horizon. Now let's move to business B, which is a software as a service business or a SaaS business. This business too is doing $10 million in revenue, but has been growing at 20% given the high growth nature of software over the last number of years. In addition, the EBITDA margins of this SaaS company are around 20%, further reinforcing a favorable dynamic and the rule of 40, considering the revenue growth has been 20 and the EBITDA margins are 20, a common metric used by SaaS investors. So this business too is generating $2 million in EBITDA. But due to the low capital intensity, recurring revenue nature, and favorable dynamics that investors have viewed software companies at, it's being valued at 20 times EBITDA. So 20 times EBITDA multiple times 2 million in EBITDA results in a $40 million valuation for this software company. However, there are threats on the horizon. Over the next 7 years, let's imagine that there are differentiated and diversified software businesses that come into this industry vertical where this current company, Company B, is operating so profitably. Let's further assume that artificial intelligence creates lower cost competitors that can compete with this SaaS company in their industry. So over the next 7 years, due to these competitive threats and technological change, this business doesn't grow revenue. And further, because they're losing customers, so churn is increasing, meaning retention is going down, their customer acquisition costs are going up, which is pressuring margins. So instead of doing 20% margins, this SaaS company is now doing 10% margins. So revenue hasn't grown in 10 years, margins have gone from 20% down to 10%, and the business is now only generating 1 million in EBITDA. And in this scenario, of course, a buyer is not going to pay 20 times EBITDA given the threats that are ever present, but they're more likely to pay something like 5, 7 times EBITDA. And this isn't hypothetical. I mean, for 4 years, the largest software company in the world, Microsoft, traded between 5 and 8 times EBITDA in the public markets. These two examples provide the quantitative framework of why the first question I ask any business owner considering selling is, does your business face a threat over the next 5 to 10 years? And the reasoning is simple. If your cash flows compress, the likely multiple that a buyer is willing to pay for those cash flows will also compress, which creates this multiplier effect that destroys substantial amount of value that you've worked so hard to create. And this is essentially what happened to my client that was approaching a $250 million sale, but still owns that business today with no sale and a lot of destroyed value. In a future episode, I'm going to walk through the essential exit framework that analyzes the possible paths a business might take in terms of revenue, margins, multiple, and the exit value. With business owners being able to understand these possible paths, you're much more prepared mentally and financially to understand what your exit value is under certain scenarios, how much taxes you might pay, and how those variables can impact your spending power after the sale. If you're interested in having a private conversation about how this analysis could impact your business, feel free to click the link in the description.